Every city speaks a language. It's in the way the streets are laid out, the height of the buildings, and even the design of a simple park bench. But what if I told you some of that language is intentionally unwelcoming? That there's this hidden dialect of design, all meant to control exactly how we behave and even who gets to use a public space. Well, let's learn how to translate it.
I'm sure you've seen one of these, right? A bench in a park or at a bus stop with these weird armrests right in the middle. It seems kind of harmless, maybe just a design choice. But it's not an accident. Nope. It's a very specific and very common example of a much, much bigger idea. It's called hostile architecture. And the key word, the one to really focus on, is purposefully. We're talking about deliberate decisions, values that are literally set in concrete and steel, all designed to control our actions, whether that's sitting, sleeping, or even just hanging around for a bit. So the name itself is a real battleground. On one side, you have proponents who use these kind of neutral-sounding terms like defensive architecture, framing it all as a security measure. But on the other side, critics are way more direct. They call it hostile or anti-homeless architecture because they want to highlight its exclusionary goal. You can see how the language we use completely shapes whether we see this as protection or persecution.
Okay, so what does this stuff actually look like out there in our cities? Well, the creativity involved is, let's just say, it's surprising. Let's dive into the main categories. Hostile designs usually fall into four main camps. First, you've got the really aggressive, in-your-face stuff, like spikes and studs. Then there's what you could call weaponized seating, those benches we just talked about. Third, you have sensory deterrents, things that use annoying sounds or lights. And finally, you get the most insidious kind, the subtle designs, where things we expect to be there are just missing. And this table right here really lays out the trade-offs. Just look at that collateral damage column. That's the ripple effect. Spikes meant to stop someone from sleeping can also be an injury risk for, well, anyone. Benches with armrests don't just stop people from lying down, they make it awkward and uncomfortable for a family to cuddle up together. And just not having any benches at all, that makes a city incredibly difficult for the elderly, people with disabilities, or really anyone who just needs to take a break. Now, if there's one single design that perfectly captures this whole concept, it's this, the Camden bench. People have called it the perfect anti-object because it's basically a multi-tool of exclusion, all wrapped up in this sleek, modern-looking package. And get this, the intention couldn't be more obvious. The designer himself said its whole purpose is to minimize the time people spend there. Just think about that for a second. A bench, an object that for centuries has been about rest, community, and enjoying a public space, was re-engineered for the exact opposite goal. So where on earth did this idea even come from? Well, it's not new, not by a long shot. This is just the latest version of a very long history of using design to enforce social control. I mean, it goes way back to things as simple as 19th century urine deflectors in building corners. But it also includes huge systemic exclusion, like in the mid-20th century when New York's Robert Moses designed low bridges on parkways. Why? Specifically to keep city buses, which carried mostly lower-income people of color, from getting to public beaches. This long, kind of ugly history was eventually formalized in 1972 with a theory that gave it all a nice, scientific-sounding name. And that theory is called CPTED, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And, on the surface, these principles sound pretty reasonable, right? Natural surveillance, clear property lines. These are all ideas aimed at making spaces feel safer just by designing them better.
But here is the absolute crucial point. CPTED, in its original ideal form, is supposed to be an additive philosophy. It's about adding lights, adding clear sightlines, adding things that bring positive activity to a space to push out crime. Hostile architecture totally corrupts this idea. It turns it into a subtractive one. It doesn't add anything. It removes comfort. It removes usability to drive certain people away, regardless of whether they've committed a crime or not.
And that subtraction, well, it has a profound human cost. It impacts not just its intended targets, but the entire social fabric of a city. The stakes can be, and I mean this literally, life and death. Some studies show that unhoused individuals are up to 200 times more likely to die from heat-related causes. So when a heat wave hits, the lack of a simple place to rest in the shade becomes a direct threat. Removing benches or making them unusable can have fatal consequences. This quote from Alex Andreou,
It just perfectly captures the psychological toll. See, for most of us, these designs are basically invisible. But for people who actually depend on public space to survive, the environment becomes this source of constant, chronic stress, a nonstop message that just says, you don't belong here.
And that's the thing, right? In an effort to exclude a few people, these designs end up making public spaces less functional and less welcoming for everyone. An uncomfortable bench is uncomfortable for all of us. A lack of public restrooms affects tourists, parents with kids, anyone with a medical condition. It just degrades public life for the whole community. But here's the good news. As these designs have become more common, so has the resistance. You've got artists, activists, and just regular citizens finding these really creative and compassionate ways to fight back and reclaim our shared spaces.
A fantastic example is the artist Stuart Semple's campaign. It started when a photo he took of these benches with bars on them just went totally viral. He used that momentum to launch a whole movement. He created these design crime stickers for people to slap on hostile objects. And he started a website to document examples from all over the world. He basically made the invisible visible. And you know what? It worked. The public pressure got so intense that the city council actually removed the bars. It just goes to show you that awareness and people power can create real change.
So this whole thing really boils down to a fundamental choice about what we want our cities to be. Do we see our city as a marketplace, where the primary goal of design is to protect commerce and property values? Or do we see it as a community, where design should support the well-being of all its people? Hostile architecture is pretty much the physical proof of the marketplace winning out over the community. So the next time you're walking around, I want you to take a closer look. Look at the benches, the ledges, the open spaces. Ask yourself, what messages are they sending? Who are they welcoming, and who are they trying to push away? What language is your city speaking?